We're in big trouble. I got to tell you, you just have to look at London. You just have to look at England. You have to look at Paris, France. We're in big trouble. And I am screaming that from the rooftops to anybody who will give me a chance to say it. We have to understand the threat to the biblical foundation, the Judeo-Christian foundation of this nation. A lot of the Judeo-Christian foundation of this country has been asleep, has basically been asleep at the wheel, and has allowed secular liberalism to leave a vacuum. And as a result, that vacuum is being filled by the radical left and the Islamists. And this unholy alliance is taking over our country.
She is Hedieh Mirahmadi Falco. What she says is fascinating, a little terrifying, eye-opening, and please listen to this and wake up. This woman is a former Muslim. She is now what she calls a Christ warrior. She was in national security for decades as a Muslim American. But she has a new book out called Living Fearless in Christ, and you can find her also at resurrectministry.com. This is one of the most intelligent people I've ever spoken to, with one of the most fascinating life stories I've ever heard. But she also knows a lot about where we are as a nation vis-a-vis the Middle East, Islamic extremism. She has seen it all. This is a conversation you are not going to want to miss, and you will be so glad you listened to her. And this won't be the last time we have her on. Hedieh Mirahmadi Falco is our guest next. Hedieh, you just told me something before we started rolling that I found fascinating, and that is that you have been married about 4 years, and the things that you're publishing now as a Christian, you're using your married name because so many things you published as a Muslim, you used Mirahmadi. So I find that fascinating. Your whole story intrigues me. As soon as I heard just even the brief overview, I wanted to talk to you. Okay. So let's just start with how you became a Muslim.
How I became a Muslim. Well, so my parents are originally from Iran, emigrated in the 60s before the Iranian Revolution. My dad came to live the American dream. He went to finish medical school. He worked for the Veterans Administration at the hospital. That was his first job after medical school. And we were raised as Americans. I didn't look for faith until I got to college because I just felt that there was this void in my life. And as I began my search, my father was like, well, the natural fit is Islam. And that didn't seem so natural because I didn't grow up with it. And the first mosque I went to was really kind of extreme. And I thought, oh, this is terrible. I want nothing to do with this. And
when
I
you
ended
say
up
extreme, what do you mean by that? What did you see or hear that was extreme in your mind?
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but it's called civilizational jihad, which is this kind of long-term strategy that a lot of the extremist Muslim groups have had towards what they believe reconquering Rome, which spreads across the West. And it's how they operate in non-Muslim countries to basically, whether it's through population, change of government, installing, Muslim appointed representatives, and then basically changing the society through nonviolent means.
Interesting. Okay. So you were hearing that. So that mosque didn't work for you. So then what happened?
So then I ended up in a mystical branch of Islam, which is all about a relationship with God. And there's a lot of whirling and dancing and singing. And I thought, okay, this is fine. This will work for me. And so that's actually how I ended up in Islam. It seemed like a culturally appropriate choice. And once I found a community where I felt that I belonged and found a relationship with what I thought to be God, I stayed.
And then what changed?
Well, after a long, arduous devotion to Islam, and I mean, I was devoted. I was extremely conservative in the sense that, like, I practiced all the rituals. I prayed 5 times a day. I kept Ramadan fasting. I wore very modest clothing. I had my head cover. I was at FBI headquarters working on what was the culmination of my career, and I decided to take my head cover off. And then people basically just flipped out on me. The Muslim community thought I was going to burn in hell for taking my head cover off, and that I was no longer a good Muslim. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. How could I follow a God that was going to put me in hellfire for a piece of fabric? And I left. And I just left Islam. And it wasn't until I came back to Southern California after living in DC for 20 plus years and decided I really had this hole in my heart again, wanting to have a relationship with God. And I followed the tweet of a girl I didn't even know who said, my pastor changed my life. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. And I clicked the link and I was listening to this pastor preach the simple gospel. And I was hooked.
Wow. Wow. That is so interesting. So you're definitely a person of faith to begin with. It was just finding the faith that resonated with you or that felt, I find this so interesting about the head covering, because I feel as though it's a statement about women in that religion. Why is the head covering so important in Islam?
Well, I think, first of all, it's part of Sharia. It's part of the requirements of the religion. Some argue, reformers and progressives have argued that it isn't. It's supposed to just be modesty. But the way it's traditionally interpreted is that it's supposed to cover a woman's beauty to protect her. Basically, that she shouldn't be exposing that to anyone other than people that are mahram, family members, by either blood or relations and certain relations. So like I couldn't take my head cover off in front of distant relatives. I could take it off in front of brother, sister, cousin, people that were related by blood. And I see, the thing is that the difference in Christ is I felt this, first of all, what I believe to be the one true God, which is different than the God of Islam, but this sense of connection and relationship between God. With the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, I felt that I then now had a relationship to communicate with God, where in Islam it felt very distant. You would throw prayers up and hoped that he heard, and there was no eternal security. So you did all of these amazing things, and then you would go on Judgment Day and see if God forgave you. Either you're going to go down to hellfire or you're going to paradise. And that uncertainty was so unsettling. And of course, that's a certainty we have in Christ.
What you said you were working for the FBI when you took off the hijab. Was there, what did you feel why did you feel you needed to do that in your career?
And it's interesting because my boss said, I hope you're not doing this because of me or, because you have to. And I said, no, I was traveling across the country to Joint Terrorism Task Force to present a new program. So it's very difficult to do something new in the FBI. And so I was trying to get everybody on board to do this new program. And as soon as I walked in with the head cover, and it was about Islamic terrorism. So I walk in with the head cover and it's kind of like, what? And it was just this kind of, this visceral response that people got. That's not their fault. It was strange. Why is a Muslim woman coming to talk to us about a terrorism program? Everybody was lovely. They treated me fantastic, but I hated that initial response. I didn't want people to judge or think about what the next 5 words were out of my mouth through a religious or a cultural lens. I wanted them to hear my words.
Well, it's fascinating to me that you were involved in this career. I'm just wondering how you sort of resolve those two things. On the one hand, you're a practicing Muslim, and on the other hand, you realize there is terrorism. There's, extreme Islam. How would you characterize the terrorism as it is separate or as it relates to the faith?
Oh, absolutely. It's for me, especially, now it is, I have had a chance to look back on the way of some of my perspectives during that time. But even while I was in Islam, I could tell you there are, and as I'm sure everybody knows, there are millions of wonderful Muslims. So we need to separate Islam as a religion, Islamism as a political ideology, and those are often intertwined. To be fair, the Islam and the Islamism are very close siblings, basically. But Muslims are of varying degrees of religiosity. So many Muslims are culturally Muslim. So they just identify with being a Muslim and they celebrate certain holidays, or maybe they celebrate no holidays, but that's their ethnicity, so to speak. Like that's what they identify with. And then you have progressive and reforming Muslims who say the Quran was a guidebook. I don't have to follow it. I can reinterpret it. It's a modern age and this is how we're going to reinterpret it. And then there are people who take it quite literally and strictly. And so that's when it becomes very hostile to other communities and nationalities. And Islamism was an advent of the 20th century, beginning early 20th century, to basically turn it into this global expansionist movement. So to revive the sense of conquering other nations. And that became extremely violent. Now, I'm creating these little buckets for simplicity's sake, but
Right.
they often merge and intertwine, and there's a lot of conflict in between them, and they're constantly redefining themselves. But that's the best way I have to explain it. So the community I was a part of was literally being massacred all over the world by the Islamists, by the jihadists, by the radical Muslim communities, basically to supplant the cultural normative practices of these local communities with the jihadist ideology. This happened all over Southeast Asia, North Africa, the Middle East. And so to me, it was a natural fight. I was a patriotic American. I loved my country. And I believed that the religion was being hijacked by these extremists. So I wanted to help the US government figure out this problem so the majority of Muslims wouldn't suffer as a consequence of what they were doing.
Am I correct in that you're no longer with the FBI?
I am no longer with the FBI.
Okay.
Correct.
And was there a reason that you left? I mean, it seems to me, that you've got these career officials that you're obviously patriotic. Why did you leave?
Well, honestly, I felt like I blew up my career because I was a Muslim. I was a credible Muslim going into Muslim communities, 37 countries in 10 years, doing all sorts of work for the government. I mean, my last contract was as a personal service contractor, a senior advisor to the FBI headquarters, but I had served in Afghanistan. I had worked for the Justice Department, for Homeland Security. I was a federal contractor. So I felt once I left Islam, I didn't feel I could do that role credibly anymore. I mean, it didn't feel like it had any more integrity because I didn't believe a lot of the things I was saying anymore. So I left.
Wow. That I can't imagine that was easy after giving so many years of life and service to this. What was that like for you?
That was devastating. It was devastating because as a federal contractor, as you see all this stuff coming out with Elon and Doge about how many millions of dollars are spent through USAID, I mean, I was one of those contractors. And so you really believe you're doing something good. And after a period of time, you start to feel like you're in a hamster wheel. You're like, oh no, I'm doing things over and over and I'm not getting any results. Things are not changing. And so there was a little of that had seeped in already, where it was just disillusioning that we weren't getting anywhere. And actually the policies that the program we were trying to pioneer at the FBI basically got shut down because little did I know, but at the time, Trump had won the election and all the Russiagate had started. So there were no new programs going forward. And so it was heartbreaking that the field had really suffered. But it was hard losing a career that you spent a lifetime building. I was honored that it culminated with the position at FBI headquarters. But at that point, I was a little burnt out too. So it was kind of a mixed blessing to just finally be done with it.
Your life is fascinating. It has been, and I think probably continues to be so. So now I know you write and we see your writings and not only books, but articles, and you wrote about USAID. So you have a unique window into the workings of Washington. And now that you are distant from it, how do you approach that? that sort of, I used to be in it. Now I'm not. I'm going to critique it and live with the consequences. How is that going for you?
It's awesome. It's quite liberating. I just love doing podcasts and articles and being like, listen, I'm going to tell you, let me lay this out for you. This is what happens. This is the corruption I see. This is, that I have seen in my life. And this is why the system needs to get fixed. And it's quite liberating to be able to do that from the outside and not worry about, because I worked in Republican and Democratic administration. Some of my largest grants were from the Obama administration, even though they knew I was a Bush appointee. So before this latest phase in U.S. politics, we all kind of got along. When a Republican was in power, because I was a Republican, we got the appointments. And then when the Democrats were in power, we went to the think tanks and then just criticized their policy. And then it would just, this cycle continued for, decades. As long as I was a part of it, it was 5 presidents. We did this cycle. So it was, but now being able to step back and say, well, these are the realities I see having a chance to step back and the changes that we could hopefully make. I have to say, having been a part of it for a very long time and knowing how far those tentacles reach, I'm a little skeptical about how successful we're going to be at really curtailing a lot of this waste, fraud, and abuse. But I'm excited at the opportunity that it'll happen.
Have you thought about offering your services to this administration?
People have asked me that a lot. I mean, if I get a phone call that somebody needs help from me, I have a number of friends that are in the administration, then maybe I think about it. But I've built a life here in California. This is where I was from originally. I have a wonderful family. We've got 5 school-age kids, 1 adult child that's left the house. And I just love my ministry here. I love my church. And so it would be very difficult to leave.
Yeah, I would imagine. You've got to be some sort of unicorn to have gone from a practicing Muslim to who's in the FBI to now a not only a practicing Christian, but a very successfully, you've got what you do now as in your ministry, and you're no longer in government. I mean, and it's just such a turn. Do you look at your life and say, my life has been lived in kind of 2 parts, or is it all a flow for you?
It's actually 3 parts.
Okay.
And sometimes when I first moved to Orange County, I would wake up sometimes and wonder where I was. Like it was actually emotionally a difficult transition. I knew I loved Jesus and I knew I was in Christ, but my personal circumstances had changed so dramatically. I sometimes would cry because I was confused. So the first half of my life, I was this wild Beverly Hills kid. I was like almost wickedly smart and doing all kinds of naughty things. And then I become this devout Muslim. And that whole life, I mean, I had a whole life. I had a community built around me because I was leading this community locally. And then, there's this dramatic shift to being a follower of Christ and having all new friends. And there's new food associated with it, and at first it was hard. It was hard to adjust. But at this point, it feels very much like home, and the past seems very much like almost like a dream. But it has occurred in 3 distinct parts.
I love that you said when you were wickedly smart Beverly Hills kid getting naughty. I wonder how naughty you actually got, because you don't seem like you were. Although, you know what? I look back at my teenage years and I was pretty bad too sometimes. But how bad? What did you do, young lady?
So bad. I mean, I talk about it in my book. Sometimes I drove so intoxicated, I don't even know how I got home. I mean, we would just pull over the side of the road, throw up, get back in the car and keep driving. It was, the promiscuity, going home with complete strangers. And I look back and I was like, I could have been chopped up into into little pieces. You have no idea.
Doesn't that amaze you sometimes that you survived all that stuff?
unbelievable. And and nowadays we don't let our kids out the front door because we think they're going to get hit by a car.
Or we also think, oh God, don't be like me. Don't do what I did. Please don't do what I did.
Constantly tell her that. And I mean, we would hitchhike places. We would hitchhike.
Oh my gosh.
To get to the beach, we would hitchhike.
Oh my gosh.
Be like, we need to get to the beach. How else are we going to get there? And it makes you wonder, what were our parents thinking? Because as soon as we left the door, and I wasn't alone, I had a whole troop of friends. It was just like, bye. They didn't figure out where we were going or how we were
They
getting
trusted
there.
you. Somehow because
Yes.
you were smart, they trusted you. And
Yes.
I don't think my parents shouldn't have trusted me either. I did some wicked things as well. But and I grew up in Southern California as well. You and I have some commonality there. I grew up in Manhattan Beach. So you may have been hitchhiking in Manhattan Beach for all I know. Or was it Santa Monica?
Both.
Okay. Okay. I mean, this is remarkable. I love that you're willing to share that part of yourself and without shame or without, I don't know if you feel embarrassed about it. I don't. I think it's it's part of life, and you pray to God that your kids are safe because the horror stories are real and all of that stuff. But the fact that you're able to say it and own it and then talk about this transformation in your life is pretty cool. I applaud you for that.
You.
I think people can learn from that. I do. So good on you.
Thank you.
When you this other thing popped out in what you just said about food changing for you.
Yeah.
And I forgive my ignorance because, look, I was raised Catholic. I don't know what food you're talking about.
Pork.
So,
yeah. I mean, I didn't eat pork. I didn't grow up eating pork, and I didn't eat pork for 25 years as a Muslim. And so, you come into a Christian community, and I really struggled with that. And actually, in prayer, I heard from the Lord because I was reading this passage about Peter sitting on a rooftop, and this sheet descends with all of these animals. And the Lord says to him, eat. And he says, Lord, I don't eat unclean animals. And he said, eat, do not make unclean what the Lord has made clean. And I had this, I was listening to a sermon. And I had this like revelatory experience where God was telling me like, look, don't make unclean what I have made clean. Don't make up your own religion based on your past experiences. And from then on, I just started, I didn't discriminate against pork or beef.
And how do you like it?
I love it. I love it. But even culturally, I'm a Persian, so I grew up with a lot of Persians, and we ate Persian food at home. And then I go to DC, and I'm surrounded by Pakistanis and Indians and other Turks. And so we ate a lot of Arab food and Turkish food and Pakistani food. I come back to Southern California, and the Christian community is, of course, distinctive from the Persian community. And so then all the food items, the cuisine changed. And that was hard. I just wasn't used to eating that kind of food.
Yeah. That's such an interesting detail. I wouldn't have thought that. I have so much I can ask you. So I want to try to get through some stuff that is just coming to mind as we're talking.
Sure.
It's interesting to me as someone, I'm still on what I would call a faith journey. Okay. Baptized Christian, or raised Catholic, left the Catholic Church, became sort of re-entered religion through an Episcopal church here. My kids have been baptized Lutheran. So it's a mixed bag, but I am finding my way back to some level of a relationship with God. You are clearly an intellect. You've been exposed to so many culturally diverse experiences and realities. And for some people, they would say, well, if you're so smart, how can you have faith that all of this really happened, that Jesus is real, that, because it doesn't make logical, intellectual sense to me. How can someone rise from the dead? All of these things. And I just wonder how you would answer that to somebody.
Sure. And actually, if you look back at some of the greatest people of faith, they were strong atheists or scientists. And honestly, it's you reach an end to yourself and your intellect when you can really understand the divine power of God. And so I had seen many miraculous things. Even as a Muslim, I saw a lot of demonic things. So I saw demonic oppression, and I saw exorcisms all across the Middle East, all across Southeast Asia as well. And so the supernatural was comfortable for me. I knew it existed. I saw it. I mean, I saw people, speaking in these demonic tones and writhing in pain, and the sacrificing of animals, spilling blood. I mean, all kinds of supernatural experiences, and people being affected by them. So I knew that existed. That wasn't uncomfortable for me, but it was really, and then I have my own supernatural encounter with the Lord, where I hear his voice and he calls my name. And that I knew for certain. So then I had to work backwards and intellectually accept what the Bible was teaching me. And so I simply got a Bible, got Logos software, and I said, you know what, I need to completely understand the difference with Islam and the Bible. And really, if you read the Bible and read commentaries and listen to sermons so you really understand the context, the Old Testament to the New Testament, you've got to read the whole thing. And all of the prophecies that are foretold in the Old Testament coming true in the New Testament, to me, it absolutely proves the validity of the Bible and of the entire narrative. And so it's not hard for me to accept that Christ rises from the dead when we've seen in our lifetimes just our own lives rising from the dead. So the physicality of it, I don't get stuck on the physicality, especially when I've experienced these spiritual resurrections in my own life. That part of it, the physical part, is not difficult for me. And then when you look at the prophecies, you say that this has been foretold throughout time. I mean, just simply reading the book of Daniel and reading the prophecies that the Lord tells Daniel before these kingdoms even exist in the world. So the Lord is telling him about the rise of the Romans and the rise of the Greeks, and describes them in these visions to Daniel. And those empires don't exist when Daniel gets these revelations. And sometimes when you read it, you overlook that. You're like, oh, okay, this is a great historical account. You're like, but wait, this is 400 years before that happens. Right. So it's just things like that affirms for me the authenticity of God's story to humanity. And that's what the Bible is. It's God's love story to us. And if we read it through that lens, then I believe we can all experience what God is trying to tell us, and that he's calling us to himself and to his son.
That's well said and very interesting. And it's raising my curiosity in a lot of ways, which I appreciate, by the way.
Thank you.
The other thing you talked about was this kind of taking over the world, this Islam, by growing populations, by putting people in places of power. I happen to now live in Minnesota, where Ilhan Omar is one of our representatives, where we have a very large community of Muslims. And, I wonder what you see in America right now in terms of how successful this has been here. We see the Jew hatred, the anti-Semitism, the protests on campus, anti-Israeli protests, pro-Palestinian, really pro-Hamas.
Yes.
When you see all of this, where do you think we are? What and is America built to resist this?
We're in big trouble. I got to tell you, you just have to look at London. You just have to look at England. You have to look at Paris, France. We're in big trouble. And I am screaming that from the rooftops to anybody who will give me a chance to say it, whether it's, on a podcast or through writing or public speaking that I do locally. And even I'm going to be traveling to a couple of states to do that as well. We have to understand the threat to the biblical foundation, the Judeo-Christian foundation of this nation. And if we don't, and I don't mean that in a aggressive, we've got to kill people kind of way. I just mean holding on to our values and making sure that they're instilled in our society. And I think a lot of the Judeo-Christian foundation of this country has basically been asleep at the wheel, and has allowed secular liberalism to leave a vacuum. And as a result, that vacuum is being filled by the radical left and the Islamists. And this unholy alliance is taking over our country. I can tell you, because I've been researching this for almost my entire adult life. And the riots and protests that we see now on college campuses absolutely would not have occurred in 2014 and 2015. Muslims would never have taken to the streets in that way. It is only by being emboldened by the radical left that they feel safe enough to do something like that. They were always afraid of the national security apparatus and what they would do to them. But this, not only the demographics have changed, but the empowerment of these aggressive, radical interpretations of Islam have gained prominence, and they're gaining support. And as a consequence, our communities are changing. Our society is changing. I mean, there's a 420-acre Islamic city being built in Plano, Texas.
I heard about this.
You know, a lot of people haven't even heard about it. 420 acres. And so people are like, well, Governor Abbott's going to stop it. Well, guess what? Governor Abbott doesn't have a lot of tools at his disposal at this point to stop it. Because if they don't violate equal housing laws or they don't violate discrimination laws and they haven't committed a crime, that city's going to get built. And so these laws are being used against us, and we have to start farther back. In other words, whether it's what we teach in our schools, it's how we impose, how we advocate and encourage our own biblical values to be expressed by our young people and through community programs and through our government. And historically, the Christian community has said, you know, we're not getting involved in politics. We're not getting involved in politics. And so therefore, we're not involved. There's a giant vacuum.
How much faith do you have in this current administration to throw sand in the gears? I know they're being resisted every step of the way, but what do you make of what you're seeing so far?
I'm very excited, and I try to explain to people who are not huge President Trump fans that you've got to understand that he is fighting an asymmetrical warfare without saying so. So the America First agenda accomplishes all the things that we need to do to stop the onslaught of the radical left and Islamism. And if we cut him at every turn, he's not going to be able to do what is literally for our own protection. So whether it's the task force against anti-Semitism and against Christian persecution, so that's elevating and protecting our communities, stronger borders and immigration. He's focused on MS-13 right now and Tren de Aragua, but trust me when I tell you there is a huge push for the Middle Eastern radical jihadist groups as well. It's just not publicly discussed as much. And maybe that's, strategic or whatever it may be, but also the idea of a strong national identity founded on God-given principles of liberty and freedom and a God in whom we trust. And so by putting forth this as a package, and remember, nationalism, having faith in American identity, I'm not talking about a Christian nationalism. I'm not talking about Nazism. It was an abhorrent, disgusting, horrible time during Hitler, but he was advancing an ethno-nationalism. That can never exist here in the United States. We are a country of multiple ethnicities founded with a central coalescing around a set of values. And those values is what make us unique. If we sacrifice those values, the American experiment dies. And so I think these are all the things, and the protection of Israel. They're our only reliable Middle East ally. It is God's nation in the Bible. It is God's country in the Bible. Again, if you read it from Old to New Testament, God constantly reaffirms that. And we have to stand together with our strongest ally that is literally the first line of defense. So people look at the riots on college campuses and they say, that's just the Jews. So what do I have to worry about? It's not the Jews. It's not just the Jews. It's the first line of defense to everything the West represents. As far as they think they are the colonizers, they are the oppressors. And if they get rid of Israel, then they come after the rest of us. So we can't see this as just a Jewish problem. It's a free nation problem. It's an American problem.
I remember after October 7th, one of the relatives of someone who had been kidnapped or killed said, "You are next." He looked
Yes,
right at the American press and said, "You are next." And
absolutely.
I believe that as well. And I mean, it's only seems to have been escalating. We can go back to 1990, was it 98 when the towers were first attacked? We can go to, 2001, 9/11, which seems to me people are already forgetting.
Yes.
When we said we would never forget, we said we would never forget and never again with the Holocaust. And here we are, people saying, "Oh, October 7th didn't happen." It's like,
Horrible.
I'm baffled. I'm terrified by these people. And I just hope there are enough good people on the right side willing to stand up and continue to protect our values. I pray that that's true. You are a beacon of hope for me right now. Honestly, Hedieh, I did not expect all of this in this interview today. I am so glad to have you, and I'd love to have you again. You really have lived an amazing life. Let me ask you this before, let's just tie a circle around, a little bow around this. Are your parents still with us?
Just my mom.
How does she feel about your transformation?
They were so sweet. They were so supportive. They just wanted me to be happy. They knew I had a very long and difficult career in life, and they just wanted me to settle back close to home and to be happy. So they've been lovely. My father was my rock, was my greatest asset. Even when I lived, 3,000 miles away, I talked to him every week. Sometimes many times a week. And he was my greatest source of inspiration. He raised me as a patriot. He raised me in service. And I owe a lot of what I've accomplished in life to his legacy.
Beautifully said. And I'm sure he continues to see you from afar and feel very, very proud. Hedieh, it's been so wonderful. I'd love to have you again. And I think I'm so grateful for your voice and your position and your ability to influence. And I wish you nothing but more and more success in this realm. You have so much to offer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. It was such a joy. Thank you.
For me as well. And I always end the podcast by saying, be brave and do good. And
Amen.
We've just heard from a woman who is doing both of those things in huge ways. So we will see you next time. Hey, you can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe to the Trump Report. It's an email that brings you daily highlights from the Oval Office right to your inbox 5 days a week. Subscribe today at SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump.